folks, in the East Coast look over to Western Australia and see a domestic market reservation policy that has served the domestic market there very well. And if you look in our results, you'd see that the prices we get in WA are about half of what we get in East Coast market. So there's, I think, a great understanding that what works in WA could well work in the East Coast.
Energy prices weighed on the first half. What's the outlook for the second half and the full year?
Look, we've got a month under our belt already, a very strong start. In the guidance that we provided to markets, we provided production guidance that's at the upper end of the range, so really strong outcome, noting that we've actually sold the business we had in Trinidad and Tobago. So, we're expecting really strong production from the base business as we move into the second half. And, again, if prices hold up, that'll allow us to continue to take care of our shareholders as we head towards the full year.
Well, manufacturers like BlueScope say soaring energy prices in Australia are prohibitive to doing business here. Does Woodside recognise that as a problem?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, in our submission to the Economic Productivity Roundtable, we were very clear that the key to Australia's prosperity historically has been affordable, reliable energy. Australia's industry was built on the back of really cheap coal and very affordable natural gas. And we are very committed to doing our part to ensure that the domestic market is well supplied. But we need to make sure that we're getting all the red and green tape and the lawfare out of the way that's impeding development today.
Well, your industry recently indicated support for a gas reservation policy in the face of East Coast gas shortages. Do you think it will happen?
I do. I think there's been a growing realization that we need to have some mechanisms in place to ensure that gas is provided to the domestic customers. I think folks, in the East Coast look over to Western Australia and see a domestic market reservation policy that has served the domestic market there very well. And, if you look in our results, you'd see that the prices we get in WA are about half of what we get in East Coast market. So there's, I think, a great understanding that what works in WA could well work in the East Coast if we have all the regulatory settings correct.
I mean, is it entirely up to the government? Should Australian consumers and businesses have first access to the gas produced here before having to buy it back at higher international prices?
Look, I think it's important to recognize, and maybe I'll speak to the West Coast market predominantly, these big gas fields would not have been developed if the gas could not be exported as LNG. The gas fields that we developed, Northwest Shelf, at the point in time when we developed it, there was no domestic gas market. The government took a lot of risk in underpinning the Dampier to Bunbury pipeline. So they basically built a pipeline from the far northwest corner of the state down to Perth to enable industry to buy gas off that pipeline. So all of that has worked very well together. But we wouldn't have been able to invest in those fields if it was only for the domestic market. So you've got to recognize that the LNG investment in many ways unlocks the potential to develop more domestic gas resources.
Well, on the Northwest Shelf, in May, the federal government, of course, gave conditional approval to extend the life of it until 2070, but you're still in stalled final negotiations with the government. Can that be read to indicate that the conditions set by the Albanese government aren't acceptable to Woodside?
Look, we were very pleased that Minister Watt, one of the first decisions he made after his appointment as Environment Minister was to give us that preliminary approval. I would recognize that the Western Australia state government gave us an approval in December, again on exactly the same matter, that set out rigorous conditions that were scientifically based and technically feasible for how we need to operate the facilities to protect the rock art. And the discussions we're having with the federal government have been constructive. We want to get to that same landing point so that we've got the ability and the confidence to continue operating the facility in a way that protects nature, protects the rock art, but also protects the jobs and investment and future revenue that we're going to be able to generate for this nation.
So what is the holdup then in these negotiations?
Look, a lot of back and forth to ensure that we've got the conditions that make sense. Again, that they're scientifically rigorous, technically feasible, needs to stand up in court. So those are the deliberations that are underway at this point in time.
And when do you expect there'll be a final agreement?
Yeah, look, we were hoping we would have had an agreement by now, and unfortunately we don't. So we'll just continue to work constructively and hope that we get something soon.
Meg O'Neill, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.